This is classic Dr. Peterson. A single YouTube video would not make a splash like this did had there not been that accumulation of actual dead wood. And then there's the spark, and it causes it all to go up.
We've never had a situation in the usage of English before that required legislation to produce a transformation in the manner in which people spoke. It's a very dangerous precedent. So it's one thing to tell people what they can't say. It's a completely different thing to demand that people use certain words when they're formulating their own ideas.
The most important aspect of this entire position is that it's about being compelled to say something.
Professor Pete, when you hear Professor Peterson saying that this is oppressive, how do you respond to that?
The Peterson drama has done real harm to real people on campus. He's made it harder to be transgender or non-binary.
The professor he's up against, this Professor Pete, clearly is trying to wield power in this exchange. It's disguised as standing up against power.
You know, we call somebody what they want to be called in our society. For instance, I don't call somebody Julie if they prefer to be called Jordan. That's just basic human courtesy.
No, that's how names work. There's no logical connection to that example.
Here's a great little tip for people who are despairing at the possibility of remembering all those pronouns. What I do is just program in the pronoun next to the person's name in my smartphone. So whenever I'm out and about and I've forgotten whether one of my trans friends uses ze or zer or they or them or something else, I just look it up and it's really super easy.
This just cracks me up, the idea that I should have to program all of this into my phone. So I am really bad at names. My entire life, spelling and names, for some reason, I mean, it's really bad. People probably wouldn't believe it.
One thing I'd like you to really look at in regard to this controversy is to watch out for who's getting centered in a discussion. Political correctness is code that powerful people use when they're annoyed that they're actually not the center of attention in any given discussion.
I can't even talk about political correctness because it's simply just my attempt to cling to power and be the center of attention. That's actually the power play.
Bill C-16 is actually not about cisgender people. It's about protections for transgender people. And that's not, it's not about Jordan Peterson.
Postmodernists claim that everything is structured around the battle for power and that they're standing against that. But they wield that narrative for power.
When things get political, I like to ask who benefits and who gets to decide the rules of the game. So, mostly with this Peterson controversy, which is really just a small drama, a tempest in a teapot.
Well, that did not age well, did it? And this was 8 years ago.
He could just get over learning to program a few pronouns into his phone. By the way, I only have half a dozen or so that I actually use on an everyday basis. So it's not all that difficult.
If the best you have is to tell people that they are required to program into their phone the new language that you wish them to use, then you have a very sloppy argument.
Yeah, well, kindness is the excuse that social justice warriors use when they want to exercise control over what other people think and say.
Which is exactly what this other professor was just doing, and that's the perfect counter.
I would say that the highest possible value is truth, and that one of the concomitants is that we need stringent protection for freedom of speech so that we can utter the truths that we see fit.
Words are the boats floating on the surface of the water. Tools that we use to articulate that thing that we can feel. We feel that it's real. We feel it in stories. I think many people shared this experience when they first started listening to Dr. Peterson. It was as though you knew these things were true, but it was the first time you heard them articulated, as though they were brought into existence suddenly because someone was giving them form and shape by using this language, by using the correct words in the correct order. And it was a remarkable thing to see. And then he has the book, Bringing Order Out of Chaos, which is essentially the same thing that we do with our language. This is why language is so important as well. And if you are interested in, right now you can learn these things from Dr. Peterson as well. He has an entire series about this on DailyWire Plus that an entire backlog exploring this very idea and exploring narrative and the biblical stories, Exodus, his new series, Gospels, which just dropped, where he delves into those oldest stories that we have access to, alongside some of the top scholars alive today to extrapolate the wisdom that they hold. All of this is in line with that highest value of the pursuit of truth. Head to DailyWire Plus using the link in the description of this video to access the backlog of content that Jordan has created in the Mastering Life collection, covering topics such as masculinity, marriage, anxiety, depression, the pursuit of one's goals, knowledge that has actual utility. And right now, you can access all of this work for 50% off on DailyWire Plus. Just follow the link in the description of this video.
We need stringent protection for freedom of speech so that we can utter the truths that we see fit. And I think that that's a value that's much higher than kindness, for example. I mean, there's lots of situations in life where kindness in the immediate present is not the appropriate way to react at all.
Would giving the homeless drug addict money be kind? Or would it exacerbate the problem?
And so this automatic assumption that the people on the social justice warrior side of the equation are motivated only by kindness when they're also clearly motivated by power is something I find completely untenable.
I have this other professor literally wielding power to get people to program in a new language into their phones, telling me I need to program in a new language into my phone. That's the result of power. And they know that.
And I don't think that Pete's solution to program my cell phone so that I can remember what names people need to be called is a reasonable solution at all. We're actually supposed to now use electronic devices to bolster our ability to speak freely.
Thank you. And he connects it right there. From the phones to power, because it's been a while since I saw this video.
How do
In
you
case
remember
we
names,
offend
Jordan?
someone?
Is it so difficult to remember a pronoun? You remember somebody's first name, you remember their telephone number.
I can't remember a telephone number. I can remember I know one phone number. This is bad. I shouldn't say this out loud.
I mean, I think that it's
I don't remember
very
people's
true
first names
that
very easily, and I don't remember their telephone numbers very easily. And when I see a stranger, I call them by the pronoun that seems to be in accordance with their presented appearance. And
That's you
they
being
appear
lazy,
that way.
Jordan. That's you being lazy.
Is that me being lazy? No, I can't remember phone numbers. I'm terrible with names.
Throughout this whole controversy, I have told the truth at every turn. So, trying to imply that that's not what's happening on people on the social justice. Am I a social justice warrior? I don't know.
Yes, you are. You are.
There's a very high value that we should also be aiming for in addition to truth. I think that we should be aiming for pluralism.
Pluralism is on an equal plane as the pursuit of truth, according to this professor.
This means recognizing more than one set of fundamental principles, fostering independent cultural traditions of minorities, and being willing to share power with people who are different than you.
And what is pluralism? Sharing power? Why the obsession with power?
I think if you just stop centering this whole controversy on yourself and how hard it is for you to accommodate genderqueer people, well, have a little bit of sympathy. I mean, those of us who are trans encounter much more greater indignities every day and every week of the month. For example, have you recently had a bank employee accuse you of trying to masquerade as yourself?
Do not be surprised when the world is confused. I'm sorry that your bank had that encounter with you. That has nothing to do with what Dr. Peterson is saying.
My refusal to use pronouns because left-wing activists want me to use them has nothing to do with whether or not trans people are having difficulties in society. And I'd also like to point out that I've had many letters of support.
Isn't it?
I've had many letters of support from trans people, and they tell me that the trans activists don't support them, and most trans people
Jordan,
actually wanted to be referred to as he or she.
Doesn't mean
they
that
weren't
you
my
are
friends.
Untransphobic.
They
just
weren't
because
my
you
friends.
know a few people, just because you've talked
I
to a few
didn't know
trans
them.
people.
Dr. Peterson keeps trying to point out here, he's like, first of all, they weren't my friends. Just because you know them, I didn't know them.
You don't know the trans community like the trans community does. You've got no idea what it's like to be trans.
Professor Pete, Professor Pete, I'm sorry to interrupt. Let's let Professor Peterson finish his thought, please.
All right. So the trans activists aren't proper representatives of the trans community because they haven't been elected by the trans community.
Nobody elected
they're noisy.
You either, Jordan.
I'm not speaking for anyone except myself, and on behalf of other people, perhaps who want to maintain the right to free speech. I'm not claiming that I'm a representative of white people or white men or any other group. I'm speaking on behalf of myself.
What qualifies as a community? I've been thinking about that, trying to understand this concept, because we throw this term around so loosely. And you could say, okay, the YouTubers community. I was thinking, okay, well, that makes sense. It's something that you actually do. It's not just an innate characteristic. It's not just your sexuality or your race, saying like the black community, the white community. What is the white community? There's no meetups. There's no, what does that mean?
We have seen an evolution of language. There are words that we don't use
Not
anymore.
by
to describe-
legislation.
Well, legislation or not, there are words that have evolved. We don't use, for example, I'm Asian. I would bristle if someone called me Oriental. That is an evolution of how we use words.
So there's a big difference between that and things that we are forced to say by speech, compelled by law.
How is this different, whether
I just
legislated
said
or
how
not?
it was different.
I understand
Legislation is
I
how it's
understand,
different.
I understand legislatively, but if at the heart of it is to allow a student to study free of what they feel is discrimination, why not help that along?
I already made my case for why not help that along.
If people are asking repetitive questions, this is the best response. I've already told you, and go right to the core of it.
I believe that this legislation is extraordinarily dangerous, and the idea that referring to someone by the pronoun of their choice is going to radically improve their status in society or their mental health is a completely unproven assumption. I think it'll have exactly the opposite effect.
You will find out that they're actually called correct pronouns. There's no preference about this.
That is a language which you prefer. Therefore, logically, it's preferred. It's not correct.
There is on
It's
the
about
Ontario.
what's
There is on the
correct for a
Ontario.
person.
There is on the Ontario Human Rights Commission website where the policy is laid out. And if people don't believe that, they can just go look themselves.
Your emotional state is not my responsibility. You get to use that to dictate what I do with my phone, what I program in my phone, or what words I speak. And Dr. Peterson is just fresh on the scene, but he's so precise in this exchange that all of these little appearances he did, it was all from that first initial YouTube video. It got larger and larger. It's as though the forest full of dead wood had been accumulating and someone lit the fire and it just took off.